of substances based on their bond classifications. Get this stuff memorized so that you are successful at answering these types of questions. So ionic compounds. What do we call ionic compounds at home? So outside of chemistry class, we tend to refer to them as salts. So a salt or an ionic compound, it is made up between a metal and a nonmetal. And that metal and nonmetal, they are linked together with ionic bonds. Basic general characteristics. Salts tend to have very high melting points. Many salts have higher melting points than metals. Salts, in their natural state around us, tend to exist as in the solid phase. Remember, we refer to salts typically as like salt crystals. So if you hit a crystal with a hammer, you don't flatten it, you crush it. So they tend to be brittle. And when you take a scoop of a salt or an ionic compound and put it in water and stir, they tend to dissolve in water. Now the next thing is electrical conductivity. Okay, so electrical conductivity, it conducts electricity because it has moving charges. You need to get electrical conductivity, or the reason why structures conduct electricity, memorized. So here we go. Salts in the solid phase, they are non-conductors. Because their ions are in fixed positions. So there are no mobile ions. Now, you take that salt and you force it to become a liquid. You melt it. Or you take that salt and you dump it into water and force it to enter the aqueous phase because you dissolved it. It frees up the ions. So like when you think about the solid phase, very, very organized, touching, and everything's in a fixed position. There are no mobile ions. But think about how we draw a liquid phase. The particles in that phase they're still touching, but they're allowed to move around. So salts, when they are melted and enter the liquid phase, or we dissolve them so they're in their aqueous phase, they do conduct. Because now the ions are able to move. So they have mobile ions. Molecular compounds. Okay, so molecular compounds could also just be with, when we're looking at a singular unit, would be a molecule. Okay, so molecular and molecule referring to the same thing. We have learned to recognize those because everything present is a nonmetal, and they are linked together with those covalent bonds. Molecular compounds, molecules, as a general rule, compared to other types of substances, they tend to have very low melting points. Their phase depends on the IMA strength between molecules. Molecules that exist in the solid phase, they tend to be very soft. Also, their solubility in water, it depends on their polarity. So we have a saying, you need to get this memorized to help you with this. Likes dissolve likes. Polar molecules dissolve or mix with other polar molecules. Now, molecular compounds, they do not conduct electricity. The reason why is, number one, molecular compounds are made up of neutral nonmetal atoms. so there are no mobile ions. And number 2, their electrons are trapped between those two atoms. They are not freely moving. So molecular compounds, they do not conduct electricity because they have no mobile charges. So they have no ions moving around, and their electrons are held within those bonds. They're not freely swimming around like in a metallic substance. Okay, metallic substances. We have learned to recognize these because every atom present is a metal atom. Metallic substances are linked together with metallic bonds. Metallic substances, they have reasonably high melting points, but typically not as high as a salt. They tend to exist around us in the solid phase, and metals tend not to dissolve in water. They tend to be insoluble in water. Now, typical general properties of metals is that they have luster, meaning they're shiny. Metals, they are malleable, and the sister property or characteristic of malleability is they are ductile. They can be pulled into a wire. Metals conduct electricity in all phases because metals have mobile valence electrons. So, metallic substances, metals, conduct electricity, mobile valence electrons. Molecules or molecular compounds do not conduct electricity because they have no mobile charges. Melted or dissolved salts conduct because they have mobile ions. You got to get that stuff memorized.